you know, Antrieb, what do you say, Antrieb? Propulsion, engine, yeah. And if you take this iconic round thing and put some wings on the back and some NASA shit around it, no, that's it. That's what you need. This is like a signature piece for don't ask. It's alien. And we put that on everything. Because you can go to the moon in 2 hours and back, right? And you can lift and elevate and do all kinds of crazy stuff. But since we have this alien technology, it's fine. So that was a very important part to have that too. And we did it. I won the competition. That felt great. And so I could grab the little crappy 3D model and send it back to Vienna, where the designers were sitting in the office. And I got my architects on that, and they started to produce these you know, refined 3D models with the steel framing and the woodworks and the plastic works and everything that was needed for that. And this is the kind of material we sent back to Los Angeles, where then the set dressers and the art directors really just jumped on that and finalized the whole production work to get this guy on the road. Yeah, and then came the call. Okay, now production starts. This is actually on stage 7. That was the stage for the Moontag that we saw earlier with all these packages there. There was, as far as I know, this is the biggest stage in North America, or the second biggest stage. So I went to the set to continue working on the designs on the film. And I tell you what, you know, when you see it in real flesh and you can make your selfie with that thing, that felt good. That was 4 in the morning when no one was there. They just forgot to switch off the lights, and I took my time. I made so many pictures and they all turned out shit, but this one was really good. So yeah, and then the feeling to see, you know, to see Liam Hemsworth and all the other stars and Jeff Goldblum, you know, play around and do their magic around the set is just really priceless. It's a great feeling, but being an actor yourself feels good too a little bit, even if it's just your own iPhone. And he liked it. He was very happy with it. And by that time, we were already working on all these other things, and it was really an amazing cooperation with Roland Emmerich. It was very inspiring work. And when I came back to Vienna, this is what someone put on my desk. I hadn't seen it until then, I swear. But I think this is an important idea about that. You know, I had with some of my fellow lecturers today, or you know, a bit of a conversation about recursiveness, and it's really hard in you know, in today's world of art to stand out with a unique design, because it's your right hand and your left part of the brain really just, without you willing, repeats things you do. And I think it helps a lot to come up with some unique thing that is very conceptual, that will drive your design. And that I think that every other design decision that follows to that should be you know, inferior to this prior idea, like these 2 rings that I had. And this will lead to successful design, even if it's not really pretty on the first glance. But I think it helps to get some depth. So that's the other spaceship. Trickster was involved. They did a couple of effects shots, and they also did really a lot of pre-production paintings for the greenlight process, just like the one I showed you before. And that was, I loved it when I saw that. That was the concept, the early concept of the mothership, and it was very successful, and Fox loved that, and it kind of gave an idea about the scale and the idea where I was going to go. But as soon as production started, you know, some birth defects of this design came to light. And here's a few problems this design had. The first is the animation of the legs. It just, how does that go? You know, in the movie it will move, but There was no logic behind this. It would destroy the Earth before ledging to it, you know, if it kind of does weird things with these legs. So that was a problem. The other problem was it's great to have this disc over there, right? That's a cool thing. In the image it looks great, but if all the legs are retracted and it flies, you're back to Plan 9 from outer space, you know? It becomes this flying saucer. So we had to do something with this. The massing was a bit of a problem. It looks like a cardboard model, doesn't it? It doesn't feel like it has its own gravity. It's more like an origami thing that's folded over Earth. So that was another little problem that had to be tackled. And then the feet. Roland Emmerich always called it, in a very Schwäbisch accent, die Kufe. The Kufe had to be redesigned. Because it didn't have scale, you know. It could be in a sandbox. It doesn't really look like it's on a city, you know, because it misses a bit of detailing there. The airplane helps, but that's not a solution. And the formal language was also kind of off, you know. You see where it's getting, but it's still kind of undefined. So the challenge would be that you would see so many close-ups of this thing that you would really have to dig into the design, because this is nice but not final. So Roland said before I came to Albuquerque, dude, we got to do something with the Kufe. This is what we have, but it doesn't work. Do you have any idea? And I had ideas, but not really time. So I had one of the interns in our office kind of start, you know, look into something, I don't know, microscopic maybe, or biologic, or just come up with things that are really random from somewhere else. And he found that. And that was awesome. I thought this was just a bullseye. You know, you have the formal language is settled there. You don't have to think much anymore. The detailing is there. You have this massing. I mean, if you imagine this to be one of these Kufe things, there's heaviness in there. This is gonna crash the planet just like we wanted. And then look at these thorns, you know, that could hack into the earth. So I just printed this picture out and jumped into the plane, went off to Albuquerque, and Roland, when I arrived, they had a little bit of a barbecue party, the producers and him, and said, yeah, come around, let's have some sausages. And I said, yeah, I got an idea too. So everybody was already a little bit tipsy, you know, having some wine and the barbecue, and I came with this and I showed it to Roland. And he jumped in the air. He was so excited because, you know, he keeps destroying the White House. That's what he does. In this script, the script said, well, there's the White House, and the Kufe comes there and stops right there. And it didn't feel right with Roland. I said, and then comes the claw and bam! It was like a little kid in the sandbox. Yes, I'm gonna show Fox. If you see the movie now, you know, Fox had it changed, unfortunately. But you know, whoever pays for the music decides what's on. But yeah, that was a very successful entry move into the whole mothership thing. And the first thing I had to do is visualize that. You know, how would it come and kill the White House? That was really a good design door opener. And since I was not part of the art department, but I was kind of a vendor from Vienna, I wasn't sitting with the art department at that point. I was sitting at Roland's camper. This is my little spot where I worked, and I had 1 week to come up with this Kufe thing. The concept is there, but how does it look? How does it work? I mean, it's a nice idea, but prove it. So this is what I did, just really rough blocking, a little animation of how it could work. The white thing, by the way, is the White House over there. Just, you know, keep the focus. There it digs in, you know, and some animation that doesn't make sense. It's alien anyways, and wait for it. There it comes. Bam. Didn't happen in the end. I was so disappointed. But worked. Well, and now we have the, oops. Well, but it also did something else. It really, there were so many things that I solved in there. There were a couple of design issues. Firstly, the concept, the story that was to be told about the aliens was, they don't build their ships, they don't build their technology, they have it grown. They suck the magma out of the earth, and then it grows like a tumor. So we had to have these fluid things, these organic things that we got from this foot. It also has these little knobs there, you know, that was also in this fly foot, if you remember, from which little roots grow into the earth and start building under the earth more new spaceships. But all the organic thing wouldn't work as menacingly as it should have. And so we introduced to whatever is these lamellas. You know, this was a very important counter design decision that we have a two poles influencing each other with the design. So this was kind of the prototype. He liked it, and we were ready to make the next storyboards really quickly with the Kufe does Washington. And it's just an amazing feeling when you then see that was really literally taken one-to-one into the film. So here's what I did in this trailer on high end. Yeah, you see there's so much more detail now. You got this structure. It looks like plowing through earth when it comes down. So the whole thing worked much better, like in the assumptions that were made in the pre-design process. And now, I mean, I made a really large, following this Kufa, I made a really large art Bible that broke down to all kinds of formal language. And I don't want to get too deep into that, but there's 4 principles that really drove the design henceforth. The first thing was heritage. We had to take the heritage from the old film. Then we have this, bionic looking, landed from nature, formal language that would be married with this molten lava kind of thing, and the whole thing was kind of incorporated into the Kufe that I made over there. And those 4 chapters of this art Bible that we elaborated really did a huge job, because until that point, many spaceships had been designed already by the art department, but unfortunately, the art direction of that wasn't so specific, so it really narrowed things down. So you could say, okay, this one is out, this one is in, this one has to be directed into this direction. So this Kufa really helped a lot, and at that point, we were kind of the masters of this language, so we just popped out spaceships like this. It went really fast. Once you've settled your rule set, you just make one after the other. The super attacker or the alien bomber, which was the Queen ship too. We could go on forever. At one point, we just let every 5 days there was a new spaceship. Yeah, and this helped really develop the whole mothership. So it was just a matter of really, like a composer, taking the theme and producing and reproducing it on and on and on over the whole ship. And this is how it came to life. With the texture, there's so much to that. It would really kind of burst the whole talk here if I go too much in detail. But yeah, this again was a great feeling to see it plastered all over the billboards in Los Angeles. That started with a little fly foot. Yeah, and let's go to the 3rd chapter. I think we can. Yeah? Okay. So yeah, then came the in Austria you say Gusto-Stückel, which means like the really good part, the raisin of the cake, which is the iconic alien fighter. It is iconic. It's in the first movie they did such a fantastic job, I think. I think Roland was the only one who never really loved it so much. He called it the flying hat, but I think it's good, and it's a very unique spaceship. So for this, there was a redesign that we were given. That's a design one of the guys from the art department had made, and it had survived for quite a while. And it was done very early, and they settled on this very, very early because they had to build the cockpit right there, you know, there's this little part, the little head in the middle. So at one point, everybody was like, hey guys, did anybody just recently look at the fighter? It doesn't work, you know, we have to do something about that. So we got the job that Roland said, okay guys, do it differently. It has to be, we have to move on. It has to be, look much more modern and sleek and cool. But keep in mind, this one in the middle, that's out of bounds. Don't touch that. This is a set, you know. You can't do anything with the cockpit, but everything else is off to you. Steve Burke had designed the cockpit. I liked it. I thought it was really cool the way he had designed it. And this was kind of the status when we got the job. You know, this was the stage in Albuquerque. They were working on this cockpit that was designed, and we were doing their thing. So we just got this, and here's a few before and after images. This is what we got, and that's what we kind of made of it. And again, you see, what we did is we really introduced everything that we put into the art Bible and that we defined with the queenship and the kufa in the very beginning. We just applied that to this alien fighter, and it really worked, I think. This is the previous design, and see in the middle, we didn't touch it at all. And this is the new design that we made. So that was all great. So that's the new alien fighter. I stick to the idea, but make it just a bit more sleek and sexier. And then they were about to shoot. Yeah, there's a little illustration of how it could look. Not so much different, you know, but a bit more blending into the whole concept. And then came the moment that they had to shoot it, and it just didn't work anymore. You know, they had started way before we came up with this art Bible for the aliens, so the whole formal language just didn't work anymore at this point. It was pretty dramatic. And another thing that was problematic is, you can't really see this here, but they had already shot pieces where people are walking up the ramp to this cockpit. Now they had a continuity problem. You know, they had to detach the ramp and the cockpit a little bit. It just didn't work in terms of continuity anymore. One of the biggest problems was the cameras. Roland just, for some reason, it just didn't work that he put the cameras where he needed them. You know, close to the pilots, close to see them both, to look out of the window. It was another big thing. Did anyone see Oblivion? Nobody saw these two rings, you know, from the bubble ship. If they would have built that, they would have been in real trouble. So the rings were out of bounds. You can't do that anymore. It doesn't leave so much. And the steering was a really strange thing. You know, they had these seats, and I think it's a good idea that aliens don't have joysticks, but they had it like here. And it always looked like, it would have looked like the alien would just keep adjusting his seat or something, you know, but not really firing at enemies. So that was a problem too. We needed some proper sticks there because, you know, you need to see the action. The sticks are always an actor in itself. So what we did is, I mean, this is the final result, but, you know, this is what we built, and then we had an empty space in the middle. We just killed the cockpit, and these green little things, I mean, you guys all know, obviously, our cameras. So Roland and me did one thing. We just placed cameras where we needed them. Put two figures in there and placed the cameras with the proper lenses, so everything works out. And then we just built around it. You know, just built the beams and the windows and the seats and everything just around it. So every one of these, I think it was 10 cameras in total, would work just perfectly. So essentially the cameras drove the design, and then we just, you know, kind of articulated a little bit around it to mend it into the whole fighter. And there we were. So all back to Vienna, and the architects and designers back at home at Wideshot, they designed the whole, you know, the whole structure around it that we could send back to Los Angeles. And I did again what I love the most, do painting, because we needed to show to the executives at Fox they had to approve, obviously, and see what's happening, because there was a lot of delay for this shot. And since there was such a pressure, there's another image with how it could look like, you know, with holograms and some alien UI, some alien Tesla stuff. And yeah, then I zoomed in and started to really, you know, start articulating everything inside, because it's a set. You really have to go into detail, especially since the art director who was helping me, he suggested to get a creature designer for the cockpit. I thought we should, you know, do it like Hector will tell us later, you know, just sculpt it and then print it. But he said, no, let's get creature designers on that. There's some more of these joysticks we designed, and some other kind of tools, the hyperdrive. And I couldn't believe it. It's fully symmetrical, and they came with clay, like really building a huge creature on top of this set that we, the structure that we designed, and then they molded the thing in the middle. Roland, still skeptical. Brad Ricken, he was the art director who supported me there. And they molded the thing and then made a cast out of that. Do you see the brain bug back there? It's the guys who made Alien versus Predator and what's the movie called again with the brain bug? Starship Troopers, right, exactly. And then they painted it, and then it was done. And it doesn't happen so often that your first design really gets one-to-one build. You know, this was just, okay, we've got to design a chair. Okay, there it is, build it. And now, you know, a cockpit stick, okay, build it. It was such a time pressure, I mean, that the designer came to the big pleasure that you have like a one-to-one copy of what you envisioned, and that was a very satisfying thing. Yeah, and that was the set, and kind of it turned out really nice. Awesome, so I got through it with all 3 chapters. I didn't expect that. I hope it wasn't too fast. That's it.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you, Johannes, for your interesting and entertaining talk. And now we have a small Q&A session. I hope you are not shy and you have some question for Johannes. It's a great chance to ask him. Maybe I start with one question, of course. After this talk, I have a very important question. Do you have a big garden in Vienna so you can move this great model from US to your home garden?
It would be bigger than my house, I guess. Yeah, but you can't, unfortunately. Everything, every little piece that is built for film is put into gigantic warehouses.
Okay.
You never know if there's a sequel or a reshoot or anything, so the studios are very, very, very keen on keeping every little piece, every piece of clothes and costume and set there. Oh. But they would have actually cast one of these chairs for us.
Cool.
Yeah. I think we should still do that.
And now do you have on your business card alien ship designer?
I'd love to, yeah. No, I don't.
Has anybody a question for Johannes? Oh, yes.
Hi. How long was the production time in total from your work?
so we were kind of involved from the very beginning with this production artwork for the greenlight process to the very end, which was the delivery of this title sequence in the end, and that was like greenlight presentation till end. It's about 1.5 years. So it started in fall 2014 and was finished in spring 2016.
Hi, I'm also working with concepts, and I always have the question, when you build something fictional, how do you know, how does it work? Like, is it makeable to animate this, or I don't know, to build? Because as a concept designer, you don't know. How do you know it? Like how it works?
Well, there's two things in how it has to work, right? I mean, one thing is it has to work in the script, which is super important, and the other thing is obviously it has to be built. Yeah, either it has to be animated or it has to be built. And what I love so much about working in the film industry and also in the game industry is that it's always this huge organism, such a great team, you know. And if you can let go or involve, you know, other talent, it's always mind blowing and brings you further. So I simply ask, you know, if I have like in these 3 days that I came up with this potato between the rings, I kept running to the VFX supervisor and said, okay, how can we do that? Is that cool? Can we, you know, or to the DOP, the you know, cameraman, to say, okay, is that fine? Do you need more windows? Do you need more kind of, you know, presentation of the characters? Can you move your camera in there? Where do we need a hole, maybe, that you can put the camera in? So it's always about discussion. No concept designer can ever know these kind of things. You know, you get a good estimation of what could work and not the longer you do the design. But it's always about asking. It's always about involving yourself in the team, getting knowledge into your work.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I think there was another question.
I have a second question.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, we have time.
And where do you get your inspirations for your spaceships? Like, is it only nature, or do you also look into films and?
Yeah, for sure. No, everywhere. Yeah. But it's more for film. And maybe for games too, the biggest inspiration is the script. You know, that you read the script, and you shouldn't fly over that. You should read it a couple of times, and at one point things start talking to you. You know, it really, there are scenes in the script that can only solve this way, and the more you think about it, the more you read the dialogues of what the people say and how their attitudes is, the more shapes start, you know, coming in your inner eye, and most of the time I can't really nail them down, and this is the point when I need to go out and look for something. You know, I know kind of what I'm looking for. I have an idea after I've read the script. I don't really know how it looks exactly. It's more like a feeling, you know, and I think you need that in order to start browsing everywhere. Not as in browsing the internet, but that too. But, you know, looking at these microscopic things, or looking at buildings, or looking at cars, or looking at spaceships, or whatever it is. But I think it's very important to get your initial spark from what the project is.
So, thanks.
Sure.
Hello, I have a little question. When you construct the alien chair, and it's with alien-shaped round lines, and everything is organic, is it possible to create it on the real set, one-to-one? Are there variations in like the inches or centimeters to recreate it out of the sketches, the draft, the script? Because it's not geometrical, but no sharp edges, but it's so organic, and like blood vessels and so on.
Well, in this case, the story behind that is this set that was built earlier that I showed you. that was kind of in the last minute of the shooting, they said, no, it's not going to happen. We can't use that anymore. It doesn't fit in the film anymore. So they had to have a reshoot. And this reshoot was just 2 or 3 months after, after they figured it out that they needed a new one. So it was extreme time pressure on that. And I was really, as I said, I was popping out these paintings as quickly as I could. And it was just thanks to Amalgamated, is the name of this company, to their insane talent that they just put the printouts there and kind of sculpted it like this, like real artistry. Okay. So it was just really, okay, let's do it like this. In this case, it was very, very old school, yeah.
Okay, thanks. And one little more question: is it an unwritten rule that everything has to be axisymmetric or sometimes point symmetric when you consider the mothership, so that one half of a house or a spaceship is built and then duplicated to the or gespiegelt to the other side, or is this not a way normally someone is working?
No, well, there's 2 reasons for why it's good to do that. I had this discussion with Simon earlier, I think, that I like the cliché in that sense that you have to pick up the audience. You know, there has to be something to feel right about that thing before you move on and introduce something new, you know? And if you look at, flying vessels, every flying vessel, other than fantasy ones, have to be symmetrical. You know, there's physical laws to that. Doesn't matter for aliens. They could do anything, obviously, right? But I mean, there's one thing that speaks to your Sehgewohnheit, to your visual convention. And the other thing is, we took our inspiration from biomimetic things, from bionical things, looking at bugs and flies. And in biology, apart from mutations, everything is symmetrical as well. So it felt very natural that we say we have to make it symmetrical, for these 2 reasons, to kind of pick up the audience when they see this alien ship, in order to have freedom on other parts to introduce something more weird.
Thank you.
Sure.
One more question.
What are the biggest difference between creating a CG model for a movie or a video game?
Oh, it's huge. It's for a video, you have all these real-time engine requirements that you have to meet, obviously. Like what I'm doing here is just blocking. It's just random popping out shapes. It's a massacre. If you show that to a real 3D artist, he would crack up. But being a designer, I can't really tell you the intricacies between real visual effects 3D models and game engine models, other than the one is pre-rendered, the other is real time, so you get these really huge requirement differences in there. But in terms of what I'm modeling there, this is a disaster. It just really holds up a screenshot so you can paint over it, and that's all it can do. One can do another thing which is pretty cool. Designing like that helps a lot because, I mean, we were sending all the 3D models to the VFX department, and they obviously had to rebuild it from scratch, but they got a lot of information in there in terms of thicknesses and proportions and everything. So designing with 3D models is helpful in many ways, even though
to get a feel for the object.
Yeah, that too, absolutely. If you have in 3D, you can really examine it. Yeah, that's the first thing. You can have renderings as base for your illustrations. You can start animating things to really communicate, okay, this is what's happening with the thing. And you can provide it for the pipeline later on to kind of take this as a reference for further development of these 3D models. So I mean, if there's concept artists here, I mean, it's an obvious hint. You guys have to work in 3D. 2D alone is just, it's not gonna work. But I guess everybody's doing that anyways.
Thank you.
Sure.
We have this evening, this event, our digital artist meet and greet. Johannes is there, and maybe you can grab him by a drink for another question. Last question from my side. We have here a lot of students. Can you say in percent how much time each month do you spend for training your skills, to learn new things, to fill up your creativity bucket? Can you say that?
Yeah, too little, because I have this company, you know, and there's not much time for really improving my skills. They're more like in directing and creative vision, but we really work on the skills of our staff. This is a very important thing. We have these internal lectures where people do a show and tell and show their kind of knowledge and tools and what they use, and we make sure that the designers are on the edge, but I myself, I just no time left, unfortunately.
Thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you.
I have a small present for you.
Oh.
Yeah. Surprise, surprise. It's not Nikolaus.
Wow, cool. Can I open it now?
Yeah.
What is it? Hamburg Spaceships. Yeah. Oh, it's really well. Speicherkonsorten. Hanseatenpfeffer, thanks. Some greetings from Hamburg.
Can you give your headset to Simon?
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, please sit down. The second talk is also very interesting. Do you have your headset?
I do not.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I'm very happy to announce now Simon Butler. He's a dinosaur in the games industry. I think he works like 30 years in the games industry. And when I was a young gaming kid in the 80s, he works for one of my favorite gaming studios, for Ocean. I play a lot of games from Ocean. It's a gaming company from UK, and they make a lot of great games. And Simon is now very well known for his pixel art, retro style, and I think he will tell you nice stories about pixel art. Welcome, Simon.
Am I on? Oh yeah, great. This seems to be the afternoon for men with hats. Okay, the one thing I was going to try and avoid, but I kind of like saying it because it makes me feel good. I've worked on more games than any other artist in the world. Don't know why, don't know how, but I have. And strangely enough, my art hasn't changed from day one to now. I'm a pixel monkey. I'm very, very proud to be a pixel monkey, and that's what this talk's about today. Okay, this talk is called 2D Pixel Animation. It's hip to be square. Or how to do the same thing for 35 years and not go mad. Okay? Right, I actually, for the first time ever, I actually wrote my talk. Normally I just wing it, but... So my topic today is 2D pixel animation, and rumor has it that I'm supposed to be something of an expert. And while I wouldn't say that because there are an infinite number of incredibly talented kids, and they are kids. I mean, I've got socks older than most of the kids in the industry today, and the work they're churning out is absolutely mind-blowing. But what is a fact is that I've created games for over 3 decades, so I should know my trade. I should be able to say, this is how you do pixel animation. I could show you, but it would just be, I'd be doing something automatic. So I found writing this talk very, very difficult because I've been involved in the craft for 35 years, I've never stepped outside and looked at it and said, what is it that I do? I just did it. It's something that's automatic. It's as natural to me as breathing. A lot of people laugh at it. Till the day he died, my father had that one mantra, when are you going to get a real job? Even though I was making more money than he could even imagine. Yeah, you'll probably find my stuff kind of, it is, the previous talk was the sublime, this is the ridiculous, okay? Now, I do know how to design a walk cycle, a run cycle. And you'd think it would get easier or just stay as easy, but it's different with every project because every client thinks their game is unique. Every client thinks their game is a world changer. Every client thinks their game is like going to get me excited and probably doesn't. But yeah, so you design somebody walking. Every game has somebody walking, somebody running, somebody climbing, somebody shooting, somebody picking things up. And I do it over and over and over again. And like I say, it's automatic, but it never gets any easier. And the limitations on my industry have kind of gone full circle. And I'll explain that later. But when people normally learn a topic, they start at point A, move to point B, so on and so forth, so that when they finally get to Z, or Z, or whatever you want to call it, they can bake a cake, fly a plane, or drive a car. Now, I didn't learn pixel animation in that manner. The reason for that was that my industry, sounds crazy, my industry didn't exist when I started. We just started doing computer games, never thinking that they'd still be around 35 years later. So we were just doing this shit, okay? I'll also apologize, I do swear an awful lot, but it's a very Liverpool thing, so you're just going to have to deal with it. It was just something we did. Now, my very first game, okay, that's not mine, thankfully. But that's what's his name? Minor Willie. Kids went crazy when they saw that. Absolutely crazy. They thought it was the most amazing thing ever. And I'll explain why that is amazing later on. Now, because sprites are the black parts, are the pixels, and the white parts are gaps, they're ones and zeros. That's a current image. I keep none of my work. So artists all created their work on graph paper. And my very first job was create work on graph paper and then type it in. 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0. Press thumbs and then hope to Christ that it worked. You know, 9 times out of 10, it did. You know, the one time it didn't, well, tough, start again. Now, my first game, whoa, you seem to have, like, really, oh no, yeah, oh yeah, that's my first game. And it was supposed to be my first and only game. I was going into advertising, right? But I didn't. I ended up drawing stupid things like this. And yeah, you laugh. For 2 days' work, I got €8,000. They're the most 2 successful days of my entire career. Needless to say, the company did not last very long paying salaries like that. But anyway, once we moved out of, I'll have to go backwards. Once we moved Once we moved out of graph paper, things like this started appearing on the high street that artists could use to create their graphics. They were really good for creating pictures. They're absolutely awful for animation. Terrible. There was no tool on the high street for anyone to create animation. So we spent a lot of time drawing each other. You'd stand there and do this, and we'd say, no, don't go too fast. You know, I need to see an in-between. You know, what we needed in-betweens for, I don't know, because if we were lucky, we had 4 frames. But animation was really, really basic for many, many years, you know, starting with that shit that I did. Then I ended up working at Ocean Software, who were the biggest and most successful European company in the 1980s. And they had the cream of the crop. Now, this isn't one of their games, but this shows how people pushed animation. The only problem with that is every single sprite in the game is used for that one character. There's nothing else that moves in the game, except him. And strangely enough, another guy who looks just like him. But that was it. Our machines were so limited, it was a challenge every day. It was a creative challenge. It was fun. It really did make you think. Now here's one of the first. This is the ZX Spectrum, and it had beautiful square pixels. So what you drew on paper pretty much looked like exactly the same on screen. The other 2 machines, the Amstrad, 16 colors, whereas the Spectrum only had 8. 16 colors, but all the pixels were wide. The Commodore 64, wide pixels as well, house brick sized pixels. All the characters looked really blocky. Kids loved them, but they drove us as animators totally crazy. One of the most iconic characters from the era. I think that's either Bub or Bob from Bubble Bobble. But yeah, so we had to work with big rectangular pixels, and we tried our damnedest. I mean, they are actually my graphics. Hurrah! And the problem that we had was that the company I worked for did arcade conversions. So what was in the amusement arcades, we would have to try and put onto the home computers. And as designers, it frustrated us immensely because it did not look like the arcade game. But strangely enough, the kids accepted that. Now fortunately, I requested from the programmer a few tricks. You just saw, where is he? There's Bubble Bobble, right? Now, you put him on the screen, he kind of blends in. He will blend into the backgrounds because he's got no outline. My sprites, and that's my style, very cartoony, has outlines because we asked for, or I demanded, that the coder try for high-res overlays. So there's single color pixels on top of horrible multicolor pixels. So for the first time ever, we had detail. It wasn't my idea. I saw it in another game, and I was like, how did he do that? So we tried it. Now, yay, we solved the problem, but we didn't. Because what you gain on one hand, you lose on the other. So all of our machines had limited memory, limited number of sprites we could have, limited number of background graphics. So by putting all of those sprites together to make him, you lose it on other things. So what you gained on this side, you lose on the other. And it was a constant battle, and it still is to this day. Now, the 8-bit days not only restricted an artist in the size of his sprites and the number of the sprites, because the size of the sprites were invariably 16 pixels square. And there's not a hell of a lot you can do, you think. And if you were lucky, you'd have a 4-frame walk, which never looked good. You wanted it to look good. If you pleaded with your coder, he might allow you a few more frames. And we were always constantly trying to outdo each other, constantly trying to beat the other companies, constantly trying to beat the other artists in the company. And one of the points that I've made at previous talks is that, and I touched on very earlier, because it was the birth of the industry, there was nobody we could turn to for help. You've got the internet now. There are animation books. There's animation courses. There's colleges. There's universities. There's online tutorials. There was none of that. Like I say, we were drawing each other. It was like, what does a 4-frame walk look like? What does a 6-frame walk look like? We didn't know. What does a sword swing look like? So the early days of the animation were a bunch of stupid guys, mostly guys, because girls had more sense than to have anything to do with the birth of the industry. Thankfully, they've come around now and they're saving us stupid old men. But right at the very beginning, you had a room full of guys swinging sticks and pretending to shoot things. And if you were lucky, you'd have a camera. Or if you were really lucky, you'd have someone who could draw really fast and really, really well. Very few people used video footage. There were one or two, but that came a little bit later. But all of a sudden, the industry discovered this guy. And we just thought it was the greatest thing ever. But sadly, every game then started looking the same because everyone was using the same animation. This one in particular, this really melted our brains as young gamers. I mean, really, we just, what the hell? I mean, we didn't know that Jordan Mechner, he'd filmed his brother running around in the back garden. He'd used this rotoscoping before on a previous title called Karateka, but I couldn't find any footage of that. But he created Prince of Persia, which then became an iconic part of my industry. Personally, graphically, I loved it, but my problem with this game is that because it is perfect animation, it has to run through a full cycle before he can get from here to here. Whereas tiny frames of animation, you can kind of shuffle towards the edge of a platform, but no, 9 times out of 10, you'd run straight off the edge, or, yeah, you know, oh no, he can't do that because he's got to go all the way through that movement, and it's too late. The other guy's poked you in the guts with his sword. So, like I say, some got very, very complex, others very simple, very simple. This was DuckTales on the Nintendo Entertainment System, and this shows how game artists, they use the most powerful frames. If you're really limited in the number of frames you have, and we were, you go for the most dynamic. Legs together, legs apart. The most iconic run in all of games. 2 frames. No one ever noticed that it was 2 frames at a time. You just loved Mario, and you never wanted him to stop running, except to do one other thing. There is one animation cycle that has existed in every Mario game, right to the latest one on the Switch, and that's that one. The air jump. Even today, Mario, with all his billions of polygons, the moment you press jump, he's there. He's there, and it's great. Now, the thing is, limitations do force the artist to design bold features and iconic poses that resonate with the player and stand out on screen. What a load of bollocks. But it's true. Size is a challenge. Tiny sprites, they do make you think, what? Oh, you immediately think, I can't do anything in 16 pixels. But then you realize you can. The more you dick around with this, you really, really can. Now, that's mine. And that's from a brand new game coming out this year. And he's 16 pixels tall. And it doesn't look amazing, but I really liked it. I mean, I was pleased. Now, that's another one of my titles that's coming out next year. And I just thought, yeah, I'll make him bigger. Oh, the animation's going funny. But anyway, that shows how not to do it, because I filled the sprite box with the sprite. I was so lost in the process of, oh yeah, I've got more colors and more pixels this time, and I can put him in. And then I realized, shit, I've got no room to bring his arm over the top. I can always ask the coder to put more sprites on top, and he will, but he'll hate me forever, and it'll slow things down. So I changed him. And that's how he's going to look. He's not going to animate like that, because the animation's gone a bit strange. But he's a lot smaller. That's within 24 by 24, and I think he's 16 pixels tall, so he's got enough room. Big sprites are living hell, because big sprites look beautiful with all that detail in the hands and face and clothes, but because they're bigger, your development time gets longer. Or so you think. The development time is just as long on a small sprite, because you'll put so much work into utilizing the space you don't have that it is a real, real challenge. A real challenge. Now, I'm not saying that my goofy little stick men are the epitome of sprite animation, but when you do get it right, when you work on something for a day or two or even a week, and you finally get a small sprite looking good and animating the way you want it, it's like all your Christmases and all your birthdays have come at once. I mean, it's just wonderful. So basically, there's no sprite size, there's no pixel box that's better than any other. They all have their bad sides, they all have their good sides, and they all bring challenges. Now, for the longest time, all of a sudden PlayStation came along, Lara Croft and her strangely shaped breasts came along. You know, I think, they might have had 3 sides or 5, or God knows. But pixel art became unfashionable. I became unfashionable. I never moved with the times. I stayed firmly painted in my pixelated corner. I flatly refused to let go of my pixels. I don't know why. Maybe I was just stupid. Who knows? But slowly and surely, the pixel, it keeps poking its head back in. It just keeps saying hello again, and people fall in love with it again. And so while work was sporadic for a long time, and my family probably hated me for it, and we did struggle, work was always there. Slowly but surely it came back. But now, right now, and I don't know, I've tried to break it down. I've tried to understand why. There's an indie scene that is taking on the AAA studios. And for the most part, they seem to be winning because they're not fighting on the same battleground. They're not trying to beat Call of Duty and get to the top of the charts. All they're trying to do is quality games that people like to play with quality art, and pixels seem to be their medium. And it's probably safe to say that there's more pixel titles around now than there have been in the last 25 years. Even though I've done lots over 35 years, the last five or 6 years, there's pixel art that I could only dream of. Anyone here know the game Owlboy from D-Pad Studios? Anyway? Anyone? Yeah? A few hands going up. Even though I disliked the game intensely, I found it very shallow. It's got, without a doubt, it's got the best pixel art I've ever seen. I think it takes on the Japanese, and they are masters. They are masters of the pixel art. But this Swedish guy, Simon Anderson, he's just done magic, absolute magic. But because of the pixel and its limitations, and because of the things they wanted to do, this game took 9 years to develop. Most AAA studios, EA, Ubisoft, they would not work on Gears of War or Assassin's Creed for 9 years. If a game took 9 years, they would can it. But the pixel attracts people. The pixel demands attention and demand it. I don't know why. It demands to be loved. It really does. You either hate it or you love it. There's no middle ground with the pixel. It's a funny little bastard. And one of the other reasons, and this is where I'm probably going to have to run for the door quickly, unlike vectors and polygons, there are no tools that can make your job any easier. I'm not denigrating polygons. There's no ZBrush for pixels. You can't draw something on the left-hand side of a guy and it appears on the right-hand side. If you're going to draw something minimal, you have to draw the whole thing. If you're going to draw something absolutely amazing and vast and totally mind-bogglingly detailed, you've got to do it one pixel at a time. And that's what pushes some people away, and that's what sucks some people in with pixels. You can bone pixels, but that's not pixel animation. There are shortcuts and tricks that you can use, but they are only tricks. A lot of people just move things around, cut and paste. I do an awful lot of that. But the bottom line is, you've got to draw every frame, one pixel at a time. Now, it is an unavoidable, a blatant fact that all the new games, the pixel games, are indie teams. And because they're indie, that affects their development process. Because they're indie, they're almost certainly broke, right? And this is why it takes so long, because a team, if you're lucky, you might have two artists. You'll have the background guy, and then you'll have me doing your pixels, moving them around. If you're not lucky, I do everything. And that's why these games take forever, absolutely forever. Where are we? Owlboy. I mean, I found every single frame of animation, and I could have just cycled through that for an hour. This guy, Simon, is just... But Iconoclasts from Konjac, a one-guy team, 10 years. There's a beautiful, beautiful game that falls into two crimes. One, he uses way too many frames on his characters, so every animation is very slow. It's like they're being pushed through mud. They're beautiful, but everything takes too long. And it is called The Legend of Aya, and he's been working on it for 20 years. It's one of the most amazing games I've seen. It is beautiful. If I hadn't finished a game in 20 years, I would find the nearest lamppost and just hang myself. You know, this guy must have won the lottery. If he's supporting himself off that, I'll eat this hat. I don't even know if this is from a game, but these illustrate perfectly the beauty of pixels and also the problems. You can build that girl in polygons, and she will look amazing. And then you just set cameras all around her. The pixel artist on this had to draw this in every direction and make sure that the down frames looked like the right frames, looked like the left frames, and looked like the up frames. He's even made life even more difficult for himself because most artists are pushed for time, and most coders will suggest what you do is flip your sprites. So if a guy is walking across this way with a gun in his hand, and he turns, he does not have the gun in this hand, it has magically appeared in this hand. And most gamers don't notice that. The brain just accepts it. Now, with these indie teams, people are throwing out those old tricks. And like I say, whoever this artist is, he's made life really tough for himself by demanding that the sword stays in the same hand. And I've got a sneaky feeling that if I really went searching, this guy's probably animated this girl in not just 4 directions, but 8. So he really has made life hell for himself.
Simon.
Okay, right. Well, in that case, I'll turn, no, I won't. I'll just go, ba, ba, ba. Okay, that's my rubbish for the next year. The thing about pixels is the challenge. The challenge, if you get it wrong, will frustrate you. If you get it right, it is the most rewarding thing in the world. It really, really is. And at the moment, I'm once again a solitary pixel pusher. And I'd just like to say, it is hip to be square. I'm going to be pixelated till the day I die. So everybody, thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon, for
My pleasure.
For your insights in 35 years gaming industry. When you see all the new titles today, has something changed in 35 years?
I think now, I don't think that today's developers are looking backwards. They're aware of their roots. They're aware of where the industry started. I think now you've just got more people wanting to tell stories, rather than just a game, collect all the stars, save the princess. There's more story-driven titles, and for me, that's a wonderful thing. I'd like to work on some. Hopefully, I will. I'd like to think I've got some more pixels under my belt somewhere, but no, today's indie titles they're an inspiration to me. I don't like to think that I'm an inspiration to anyone else.
Yeah. Thanks. Questions from the audience? Has somebody a question to a pixel artist? Nobody? Okay.
No problem.
Simon is this evening at the
bunker?
At the bunker, yes. One question from my side. When I take a look at the big AAA titles, my opinion and the opinion of a lot of gamers are that the big titles lost their creativity. Is it because all the big titles go more and more realistic and not this artificial style? Or
I don't think they've lost creativity. I think, unfortunately, I was having this conversation earlier on with Johannes in that in your early days, in any company's early days, you're firing on all cylinders. You're trying to make a mark in the world. You're trying to be noticed by the money men. So you're creative. And you have more freedom at the beginning of your career than you will. We both agree, the moment you become successful, you almost always lose creativity, because then you have your franchises, you have your Assassin's Creed, your Call of Duty, and you just milk them forever because the fans don't want to see them end. I remember walking into a studio many years ago, and they were very successful because they did American football games, and they'd been doing American football games for 10 years. And I said to one of the artists, "So, what's it like working here?" And he just looked at me and said, "Kill me now." The company was secure forever, but only as long as it kept doing the same thing. The moment you take a risk, it might work, but most probably it won't, because the fans just want more of the same. So that's unfortunate, sad but true. So there's no lack of creativity, it's just a fear of failure, really.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Our next speaker on stage is Hector Moran. He will talk about sculpting. Sculpting is a very interesting process for all artists who are in the animation scene. And maybe you see the sculpting process on the big electronic stores. You can print out your 3D models, and that's the stuff from Hector. Thank you.
Is it on? Okay.
Yeah.
Just give me a second here. I brought a few prototypes and final products of things that I've worked on. And so yeah, I'm gonna just plop them right here and then get right to it. So yeah, hi, my name is Hector Moran. And when I was putting together the presentation for today, I started just kind of putting this little collage together, and I kind of realized that between toys, video games, graphics, fan art, and characters for animation, I'm probably past the 100 characters for production mark. And this is not everything, so this is a selection. But yeah, part of that has also made me realize I've been around a while. So yeah, who's this guy, right? So I'm a freelance character artist, and basically in a nutshell, some of that means that on a good year, I can choose my own projects. I do get to choose my own clients. I fight for projects that I want if I really want a project, and there's been a few examples of that. One thing that I'm trying to transition a bit into is being an independent artist, and for me that means creating my own little properties, my own maybe either comic book type properties or just kind of my own little collectibles lines. And yeah, with that I just kind of I have to learn new things, and some of that, for example, the skull that you see there, if you can see it from where you're sitting, that's from my own printer. And basically what I'm doing these days is that I have my own printer and I'm starting to learn to use it and get better results with it. So that has its own learning curve. I'm also a part-time teacher, and I also made too many slides for today, so I'm gonna go pretty fast through some of them. So sorry if some of this starts feeling a bit rushed. But just to show a few examples of projects that I've worked for. During my first year freelancing on my own, I was lucky enough to do a few skins for League of Legends. That's one of the most known game projects that I've gotten the chance to work on, so that was pretty cool. And just last year, I did a few characters for Spirit Walk's Shardbound. That's another MOBA game. So I started in 3D printing with a project called Kingdom Death. I started on that project during around 2009, 2010. I did some of my first miniatures for that. And that was the guy that made Kingdom Death. His name is Adam Putz. And he was one of the first independent creators working with 3D printing for miniatures. Back then, it was not really that much of a thing. So this was like the very beginning of some of that. By the time I went freelance in 2012, I did a lot of work for Kingdom Death. And that was the year when Kingdom Death went on Kickstarter and broke records for board games by raking in $2 million for the first Kickstarter. A few years later, they did a reprint and an expansion of the game, and that went and did also another record-breaking $12.3 million. And it's a very niche sort of game. It's sort of like, the way I could describe it is Dark Souls, but in board game format. With a lot more anime influence. And so yeah, that's one of the projects that I worked on, and that was basically the first 3D print related project that I got to work on. These two are big for me. These two are big projects that I got to work on and I was really happy to be a part of. And these are two examples of something that as a freelancer I wanted and I kind of fought for. So Mega Man was a board game that was made a few years ago. And I knew the company that was doing the miniatures for that game. I had worked for them, but they hadn't called me about doing miniatures for this game. So when I heard that they were doing miniatures for this game and they hadn't called me, I called my client and I'm like, hey, what's up, man? So I basically elbowed my way into doing miniatures for this project. And eventually, I kind of was given all of the miniatures of Mega Man himself to do because Capcom really liked how I was doing the characters. A similar thing happened with Street Fighter. Street Fighter is a recent project that was kickstarted, and it reached $2 million, and that was kickstarted. It finished kickstarting in May, and I'm still finishing the characters for that. I'm doing all of the characters for it. It's around 35 characters, so it's 35 miniatures by one crazy dude. So yeah, my own projects are also something that I'm pursuing, and you can see there just a bit of a collage of some of the ones that I'm doing. At the center in the bottom, you see my printer, and that's sitting in my office. It's pretty big. It's a big machine. But I waited a long time until I decided to finally buy a machine for myself. I kind of wanted to wait until because the technology kept going up and up and up and improving. And if you don't wait for a bit of a plateau in the technology, you can buy something that ends up being obsolete within a few months, and you don't want that. So I was waiting, and this seemed to be the right time. These are also on the top there. These are a few other projects of miniatures that I basically kind of made, and I kickstarted, or I put on Indiegogo, and I self-funded. They're small projects, but they're kind of small steps towards this whole independent artist thing that I'm also trying to do. So yeah, I started in the industry, in video games industry, back in 2005. I started a studio called Streamline, and in that studio, it was an outsourcing studio, so they were doing graphics for video games. Some of the video games that we got to work on there. The first video game I ever worked on was Saints Row. I started as an environment artist on Saints Row, and I did several buildings for that game. And then eventually I worked on Overlord. At that studio, I didn't personally work on some of the Gears of War stuff because at that point I was a lead artist, and I didn't get hands-on working on some of that stuff. I only got to supervise some of the artists doing some of those projects, like Battlefield 2042 and Unreal. Those were projects that I was more supervising artists now and then, rather than creating content for. I ended up moving to Vienna, Austria, after the previous studio was in the Netherlands. That's part of how I came to be in Europe. And yeah, in Austria, in Vienna, I got to work on some of these projects that you see here. And I worked at that studio for 3 years. But while I was working at that studio, I kept trying to build my online presence. I was participating in forums and communities. And through building that online presence, I started getting freelance work on the side. And the nice thing about having freelance work while you are having a full-time job is that you have all the leverage. If a client comes to you with a shitty project that is not paying well, and you don't need their money, you don't need their project. So if you have a full-time job and you're being offered freelance jobs, you can just take the ones that you want, and that's basically what I did. I got a lot of freelance offers when I was working at this studio, and I turned a lot of them down because they were either not offering me the money that I was asking for, or because they were not interesting projects. So that was nice. And after 3 years at Sproing, I went freelance. So that was in 2012. This is just some of the logos of some of the companies that I worked for. So you see, for example, Hasbro and Schleich. So Schleich is one of the toy companies that I've been working for in the past few years, and that's one of the little mermaids that I made for them. I've made a few of those, and I also made one fairy last year for them. And I enjoy that kind of work. I enjoy making toys now, basically. That's kind of fun. So yeah, I'm gonna cover in a hopefully not too rushed fashion, but also still interesting fashion. Some of the process and some of the differences between because by now I've been working on video games, animation, and also toys and collectibles and all these things. And they all share the aspect of what I call high-res or the sculpting, basically, and that's all done in ZBrush. They all share that aspect. And everything else that comes after, it just kind of branches slightly differently. But I've become proficient enough at doing those kind of different technical requirements that I can work on all of these industries. As a freelancer, that has provided me also a lot of freedom and a lot of protection when, if the video games industry is having a console transition and things are kind of quiet, I can just work on games. I can work on board games, or I can work on miniatures or toys. You know, so I always have a bit of different industries that I'm doing work for. So one of the things that I wanted to cover, and maybe I'm not sure if there will be enough time to cover this more depth, but things like the core aesthetics of something, like when you are designing, when you are sculpting and making figures, there's a lot of things that you need to get good at, that you need to do well. And for example, one of my favorite games in recent history was actually the Disney Infinity game. I grew up in Mexico, but I grew up with a lot of Marvel comics. So I was a big fan of the X-Men from the 90s, and I was also a big fan of the art style that the guys that made Disney Infinity came up with. And because of rights and other things happening with Marvel, the X-Men were not going to happen on Disney Infinity. So I decided, you know what? I have the power to do this. I'm going to make my own X-Men in the Disney Infinity art style, and so I did. Sorry. And when I did this, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about working with very few lines, very few shapes, and a lot of simplicity. It forced me to strip down into simple lines and simple shapes and make those good. And you can learn a lot from that kind of exercise. So, of course, another type of aesthetics is like more realism or more detail. And I've done a bit of that also, for example, with this project of mine. But the thing is, with projects that are more complex, more detailed, you have to become consistent. I mean, shape language and all these things, it's some of the stuff that Mücke was talking about. And these things apply to characters. These things apply to basically everything that you're trying to do in a visual medium. So this whole aspect of core aesthetics is just basically making the high-resolution source asset as good as possible. So some of the things you have to consider when you're making your high-res stuff is there going to be facial animation? For example, when I made the skins for League of Legends, those characters are really tiny on screen, and they don't have facial animations. Their mouths are shut, and their eyes are just open. They don't have an eyeball that you can rotate, and the eyes don't blink. These are flat faces that are just textured. So these become aspects that also play a part in your high-res asset creation. So yeah, like you have to ask yourself questions during this process, like also, is there facial animation? How's the character gonna move? Do they have any weird special weapons? Is there hair or fur on the production? All these things, of course, come into play when you're doing this high-res designing or sculpting. Of course, when it comes to printing, how big you're going to be printing something is a bit of a concern, because that starts dealing with weight and balance. Then, of course, if you're doing something just for a one-off print, like the skull that I have there, then you don't have to concern yourself with as many things as you do when you have to do something for mass production. I'll try to get a bit more into that if there's enough time. So yeah, this whole functionality thing, it just basically covers the aspects of what's on the character. Does it have hair? Does it have fur? All these things that I was just asking and mentioning. But the other thing that you need to also watch out for is that you don't let those expectations or technical restrictions restrict the design. When I make a miniature, when I sculpt a toy, when I sculpt a miniature, that is often based on really cool concept art. And what I try to do first is I try to match the concept art and then I concern myself with the technical aspects of the miniature. Like, are things thick enough? Is the hair gonna break off? I don't worry myself with that when I'm trying to match the concept. And then when I finished matching the concept and the client is happy, then I go in and add in some of those changes. So yeah, what I use for this part of the process is of course, ZBrush. That's just a screen cap from the Pixelogic ZBrush page, webpage. And so you can see just in that image what ZBrush is used for, and it's basically everything, you know. You have it in movies, you have it in video games, illustration, advertising, 3D printing. And I've worked on a lot of these fields with the exception of automotive design, jewelry design, and scientific visualization. Everything else I've basically done a bit of something for. So video games. Video games, if you guys are familiar with, of course, low poly, high poly, all these things. When you're making your low poly, what you saw before in the previous slides concerns the high poly, right? Like just making your sculpture that you will later use to turn into a production asset. Of course, in this aspect, you have to think about things like, what's your game genre? What are the platform specs? Is this for the Switch? Is this for a PS4? Is this for PC? Those are some of the technical specs and expectations. Then, of course, you're dealing with different art styles, and different art styles are going to have sort of different expectations and requirements. Depending on your game genre, like League of Legends, for example, the camera is a big concern. Your characters actually, the design of the characters, the guys that do the concept of the characters, they kind of have to concern themselves with how this character will look from a top angle that is slightly tilted, right? Because that's the main angle that this character is going to be seen from. So you have to try to create a good silhouette for that camera angle if possible. Continuing on, it's, yeah, triangles, triangles, triangles. One of the things that basically still defines and separates animation topology and video game topology is triangles. So this is actually not the marketing art from Team Fortress. This is actually a fan art. Someone that did that same marketing art, but with very few polygons and very few pixels. The guy's name is Tom Talion. So this is not a piece by me, but I wanted it to illustrate this right here. That's the wireframe of this character. It's super, super low. And basically, that could have been for a platform like the Game Boy, like the Game Boy, no, the 3DS, I guess. That would have been a platform for it. Or maybe this could have also worked for a mobile version of Team Fortress. But this was just the artist messing around and limiting himself to a few pixels and a few polygons. Because there's an art in there, just as you saw in the previous talk about pixel art. There's an art in very low resolution, low polygon and low resolution texture art. That texture that you see on this guy, for example, is 128 by 128 pixels. You get on Photoshop at some point and try making a canvas of 128 by 128 pixels and see how far you get when making a texture with that many pixels. It's hard. So moving along with this whole topology thing. This is an example from Uncharted, and you can see in his pants and in a few areas, this is mostly quads, basically polygons that have 4 sides, but there's a few triangles, and that's what gives it away as a video game model. That's from Uncharted 2, and this is the comparison between Uncharted 2 Drake and Uncharted 4 Drake. So the budgets have gone up a bit. You can work with more polygons. And what you also see in this screenshot is that at this point, the topology is very similar to subdivision topology. If you're not familiar with what subdivision topology is, I'm going to see if maybe I have enough time to go into that. But yeah, of course, when it comes to texturing in video games, you have your different texture maps that you have to deal with. And for a character like this League of Legends has a painterly art style, so you end up basically doing a lot of lighting and a lot of all the color and all these things in your textures. But actually, a lot of those maps are generated just from the high-res sculpt. A lot of that is not hand-painted. There's very little hand-painting on this texture from Katarina. This is a slightly more modern example, and I mean, you have now the new lighting models of PlayStation 4 and Xbox One and modern PC games. Now you're dealing with what they call PVR, physically based rendering. And this all just means that it's more mathematically correct and that you're using now different software. And there are things that go faster and easier with that software, like with Substance. And there are things that will take longer because now you're expected to do more. So this thing is always kind of moving. So animation topology, this is basically where you're dealing with all quads because this is going to be subdivided and then rendered, right? So we're not in video games anymore. This is animation, and I've done a lot of characters for animation. And so that's a slightly different approach to the topology. So topology, to kind of put it in an example, you have these two images that kind of look the same, but if you look at the wireframe on the ones on that side, you can't make a wireframe that bad if you tried. So I actually had to try to make a really bad wireframe to illustrate basically what's probably going to get you fired or get the rigger to hate you in a studio if you mess up your wireframes that bad. So yeah, if you're interested in going more into this kind of thing, just take a picture of that slide. Or just write a note down about this kind of thing. It's topology for subdivision. There's a lot of resources about this these days. There's a lot of places where you can find good information on how to do good topology. Some of these things I kind of had to learn with time and with trial and error because these things were not available back when I was starting some of this. But all these resources are there now, so hopefully that helps you. Topology for faces and characters, that's also a big thing. And one cool thing about good topology is that it tends to look or follow the flow of the muscles on a human face, for example. At least it tries to complement them or go along with them. And for that, again, there's also good resources out there. There's people like Danny Mac, who has made a few tutorial videos. So yeah, that's something to also dig into. Texturing for animation, of course, it's also changing, it's also evolving. But you kind of, when you're doing textures for animation that is pre-rendered, unless you are doing it intentionally as an art style, you don't have to paint lighting into your textures. So for example, the textures on these guys, these two on the left, there's almost no lighting in the textures of that because that's all done by the lighting engine and the rendering engine, and then also by the lighting in the scenes. The second guy is a combination because there is lighting painted into his textures, so it's kind of like a painted puppet. And then on top they do lighting, right, that is pre-rendered. So this is just a screen grab of what's going on between games and pre-rendered graphics. It's a constant arms race, basically, and they're not necessarily racing or competing with each other, but in certain ways, the video game engines are catching up. And they've been catching up for a long time, but of course, then the render engines keep improving and keep evolving. So you get things like, back in the day, you had this skin from Quake. It had all the lighting, all the skin texture detail painted, and the lighting in the engine was horrible. It was garbage. Now you have things like The Last of Us and The Last of Us 2 and Uncharted, all of these games. I'm a fan of Naughty Dog, so I just grab examples from them. And all of the stuff that you see in the trailers from The Last of Us 1 and 2, and it's all in-game. It's all real time. And it looks as good as some rendered stuff looked a few years ago, right? So it's constantly evolving. So 3D printing, I'm almost out of time. But when it comes to 3D printing, you of course have to concern yourself with something that is not really a concern in animation, at least for the character artist. If you are not the animator and the rigger of your own characters, then you are basically handing on your character, usually in that pose, either the T pose or the A pose, and that's it. Your job is done at that point. But when it comes to miniatures, toys, and other things like that, wow, that slide got messed up. So this is just showing a few of the stages of me constructing a character for a miniature. In some cases, I already sculpt the hair in post, because if I know that the hair is kind of going to be wind blown, so I already built that. So of course, I start out, my workflow for miniatures, toys, and all these things still involves a T-pose character. Oh man, what happened to those? So yeah, posing, when you start dealing with characters in pose, you start having to learn anatomy more in depth also. You start having to gather more references. These days, there's a lot of good reference out there, of course. There's websites that offer you entire scans of humans in multiple poses, and you can learn more from that. So I have a lot of those resources in my own personal library. Again, going back to this Disney Infinity example, you learn a lot from doing with restrictions, okay? In a similar way to how pixel art teaches you what is really essential and what's really important to worry about, an art style like the Disney Infinity art style forces you to do as good as possible, do really nice, elegant shapes with just a few colors and a few forms and a few lines. So this, again, was another really good exercise, which allowed me to take a lot of the knowledge that I learned from doing that Disney Infinity fan art. That fan art allowed me to basically become better at doing a lot of the things that I'm dealing with right now in this huge cast of characters that I'm working on for Street Fighter. Of course, there's things that you have to concern yourself with, like scale, water tightness, and cuts and keys. These are things that are concerning in relation to mold making, because your 3D prints are only the master print of something, right? And that master print becomes what gets turned into a mold. From the mold, you can mass produce toys, miniatures, and all these things. So yeah, the breakup that you have to do for that, it involves a little bit of like engineering, but not like really fancy, complex engineering. You just have to kind of think about what you're doing in the breakup of the pieces, and then just get them ready for printing. And there's no hard kind of science to this. You just kind of get better as you practice it, and you start growing an intuition for when a line is deep enough on a sculpture, and when something is thick enough that it's going to print at the scale that you'll be dealing with. Another part of print prep can be that you break up your model into something that will be easy to paint. So that's a friend of mine painting that Deadpool prototype, and I specifically cut up the parts of that Deadpool in a way that would be easier and quicker to paint, and it worked out pretty well for that. Sorry. So that's pretty much as far as I got with that. Questions?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hector. Very interesting talk, very interesting niche in the gaming animation scene. What do you expect in the future from 3D printing? Because it's evolved in the last 10 years very, very fast.
I'm very curious how color 3D printing will evolve, because that's going to create another kind of subset of the industry that could, for designers and people that make their own customs like I can do, that's going to open up a whole new area of kind of boutique custom sculptures and toys that you could do for people that don't mind paying, I don't know, a few $100 for a figure. There are collectors that will pay even thousands. So that opens up a whole area that is going to be interesting. For now, I'm just curious to get better with the resin printing that is not colored. But I'm very curious to see how colored printing will evolve, because it's coming along really nicely.
questions? Oh, yes, fine.
Thank you. I have a question for you. Do you want to focus on 3D printing on the future, or do you have plans to work for bigger games again?
If video game work comes my way and it looks fun, I'll do it. And if all I get through the rest of the year is going to be more miniatures or more statues, like I want to do a few more statues. Because I've done a few larger statues. There's a game coming out at the end of the year called Biomutant, and I made the special edition statue for that one. That comes with the special edition of the game. And I want to do a bit more of that, and I have a chance at doing it because I have some clients that can get me in that. But if video game work comes my way, like the stuff from Shardbound, I was a fan of that, of the art style of that game. I wasn't playing the game, but I saw the art and the characters, and I liked the art style, so I was like, hell yeah, I'll do something for that. So if something else interesting comes my way, I've turned down work, for example, for video games, doing shooters with realistic soldiers. That doesn't interest me. I have more fun doing something like a League of Legends character. I'm no good at making really clean, perfect, hard surface things like weapons. That's just not my gig. So if work like that comes my way, I turn it down. And but yeah, at the moment I'm basically not too worried about what to focus on. The good thing about how I've managed my career is that I've focused on characters, but I didn't focus on characters for miniatures only, right? So I'm able to jump between video games, toys, and everything that is out there, yeah.
So you don't play the games you're creating? Like
not all of them, no. Like I have friends that, for example, that are working in Vienna on skins for Overwatch, and they also played Overwatch a lot. I tried Overwatch myself, and I just got killed a lot. So there are some games that I enjoy, but many of the games that I've had the chance to work on are not always the kind of games that I play, but they are games with a nice art style that I like. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh. Thank you, I guess.
Sorry.
I work in ZBrush as well, and I kind of love it. I come from a sculptural background, actually, and as you can imagine, I get lost in performance questions a lot, especially when interactivity is a topic. Can you hint me towards a workflow that might help me along in my questions about how to translate the fine detail of my sculptures to like texturing and displacement solutions?
Are you going to be at the meet and greet by any chance?
I don't know, but I'll try to after this point.
Yeah, if you get a chance, maybe I can go more in depth.
Yeah,
but as far as like a lot of it comes with practice.
Yeah, sure.
And as far as performance, there are ways of breaking up your subtools so that you don't push the poly count too high on one single subtool. So there are little tricks that here and there. I'm also, my website is really easy to remember, is heck.mx, and it has a link to my Twitch. And then if you join one of my Twitch streams at some point, you might see some of the ways that I handle my subtools that kind of keep things manageable. But yeah, it's kind of long topic, but it's one of those things that just gets better as you do it. You just keep doing these things, and you start learning your own workarounds and things that work with your machine also, because we all have our own specific limitations with that, right? But yeah, hopefully that answers at least some of it.
Yeah, looking forward to the meet and greet and the Twitch. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you find the talk from Hector on YouTube later. There you can find all his slides. One last question. You talk about your miniatures. Are you a collector?
By now I am, because of how many... I have a bunch of board games that I've played a little bit, or I haven't played at all at home because I worked on them. And there are some miniatures that I've gone to miniature shows, and like they're from sculptors that I like, so I've bought a few, and yeah, it's starting to. I have too many chunks of plastic in the shape of people in my house.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward for the Biomutant.
Yeah, that looks like a really fun game.
It's a very cool game.
Yeah.
Expected it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much,
Yeah.
Hector.
Thank you.
Oh, I forget. The present.
Thank you.
Simon, I have also a present for you. Sorry for that. Yeah, I'm now happy to have here Karin here, and I think it's good to come now to Karin because Hector is a freelancer, and to be a freelancer has some cool sides when you sit on your balcony in the sun and with your drink. But I think the bad side as a freelancer is when you must finish your job on Christmas Eve. And Karin will tell you something about the good and the bad sides about freelancing in the artist scene. And she comes from the Netherlands, one of my, I like the speech from the Netherlands, and maybe you can make it in Dutch. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Dein Laptop.
And I'm hidden. I'm the odd one out. I have to use my own laptop, of course. So I have to set it up first. Just a moment.
So. Bist du noch nicht hochgefahren? Yes.
All right, we're all set. Welcome, everyone. I'm Karin. Like Hector, I'm a part-time teacher and also an animator working remotely for multiple game companies. And today I'm going to talk about what it's like to work for game companies working remotely, so from your home and still having good communication and have everything scheduled and planned. So, first, a little bit about me. This is a picture a colleague of mine drew of me with a dinosaur pet. And I like to ride motorcycle. I'm telling you all this because you have a little bit of background about me, because I'm telling the things out of my perspective, how I perceive doing the freelance job. Okay. I like to collect nerdy jewelry, so necklaces and earrings, and I occasionally draw whenever I have the time, but I rarely have time. I love Star Trek. I would love to work at Blizzard Entertainment one day as an animator. So that's my, well, life goal. The Lion King is a great inspiration for me. And I love Guinness. Every Friday, I gather with my old colleagues because I come from Leeuwarden, the northern part of the Netherlands, and there are 7 game companies in Leeuwarden alone. And Leeuwarden is a really big city. But every Friday we gather and drink Guinness together at the Irish pub. So yeah, that's a lot of fun. Also very good to build your network. Someone laugh. That's good. Because I think the most important thing with animation is to make someone laugh or evoke an emotion. So that was some of my work. And most of the animations you see there were from Quantum Siege, which is a game developed by Armada Interactive. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So how did I get there? It all started with this guy. This is Francesco Cohn, and he was my teacher while I was at the university. And he also knew a guy named DJ People. And they used to work together at Play Logic in Amsterdam way back before the company discontinued. And he co-founded Armada Interactive, a mobile games company based in Helsinki in Finland. And he was looking for an animator. So he asked Francesco, do you know an animator? And he knew me. So it's very important to have connections, because that's the way you land your jobs and find freelance work to do. Like Hector, I also have the pleasure of just choosing my projects, only doing the stuff I really like to do. And that's a huge privilege, I think. So they asked me, come to Finland. And, well, I really couldn't at the time because my mother was very sick. And so I wasn't comfortable leaving the Netherlands back then. And so I asked, can I do it remotely? Because they were looking for an animator to make all the animations and all the rigs of the game. But I really wanted to do this project because it sounded very cool. It was sci-fi mobile game with a turnaround mechanics. You can create your own armies, and those were half mech, half human. So I really wanted to do this project, but I couldn't come over there. So yeah, I started working remotely for them. This is a screenshot of the game. To show you a little bit how it looks. So you have this turntable mechanic. You can turn around the battlefield. You can drag and drop units, and you have to destroy the gate, which is in the middle of the picture. This is the view from your army select. You can inspect your units. But then my first problem arose. No time, because I was working full-time at Grendel Games, a game company, and I was teaching 1 day a week. So I had to do it in the evenings and in the weekends, but making 48 different characters, and there were a lot of different characters, each with their own personality. I had to figure something out. How to do it. And it says, I hope I get multiple personalities. Well, I did. Every character had, well, you can't read it from there, but a lot of biography. Their whole backstory, where they were born, how they grew up, what their personality was like. So yeah, you had 48 characters. They needed 9 animations each. This is Ulf, and these are his 9 animations. So you have 3 attacks, 1 marketing animation used for Facebook and stuff, an idle, a walk, an upgrade animation for in the army inspect, a death, and a stun. So every character needed these 9 basic animations. Oh yeah, and I also had 3 levels of detail. So that meant 3 different character rigs, also different animations for the army view and the in-game view. So this is an example of the army view, the inspect. You can turn around it and watch it. This is in-game, so these are different models. And for the in-game models, we had 2 different levels of details. So 1 for high-end devices and 1 for low-end devices. If you don't know what level of detail is, it's a lighter version of a model. So less polygons, less heavy to render. So if you do the math, it's about 1,300 animations that I had to make, and yeah, I didn't have time for that. And I really didn't want my schedule to look like this, working during the day at Grendel Games and every evening working for Amada, maybe drink a beer on Saturday. So, yeah, now what? I really wanted to do this, but I had to figure out some neat tricks to be able to do it. So I tried to make an overview of my pipeline, which I used for creating the animations. I hope it's a little bit clear. So I first received the LOD0, which is the most high quality model. You can see it in the Army Inspect. And I created the rig for that, created the animations for the Inspect view. And then I transferred that rig to the LOD1, which was lower resolution. And I reduced the bones, so it would have attributes like a bag or hair. I would remove bones there to make it still look good, but less detail. And the LOD2 was the very, very low poly version of the character. And I reduced the bones even more and only used the most necessary things. He didn't have toes, he had 1 spine bone. So really simple. I created the animations for LOD1 and then retargeted them in 3ds Max to the LOD2. So sometimes I had to do some small tweaks, but yeah, it looked okay. And the trouble with Unity and maybe also Unreal, I don't know for sure, is you can't use the same animation on a model with a different hierarchy. So if you remove 1 spine bone, you remove 1 bone from that hierarchy and your animation doesn't work. So that's why I chose to retarget the animations in 3ds Max. And this is an example of the 3 different LODs. And the first 2 LODs look very similar, but you can see in the cloak that it has less polygons. So they share exactly the same animation, except for the last one, and that one is a bit more subtle because it's for the Army Inspect view. And the first 2 ones are in-game, and since the character is like this big on your device, it has to be a lot bigger. I also slightly adjusted animations. So the characters needed 3 animations, 1 critical hit and 2 regular attacks, but 2 for variation, so you wouldn't see the same attack over and over again. And to save time, I used the same animation in some cases and just added slightly variations. So you can see that every time he uses his hands differently in a different direction. And when you see them side by side, it looks a lot of the same. But in game, it's actually nice to see him doing all these stuff, but still have the same pace to the attack animation, so you can anticipate the attack. You know when he is firing his projectile, because the timing is always the same. I also mirrored animations, so I first made one attack and then mirrored it, tweaked it a little bit. Like you can see the feet, they're not exactly mirrored. That saved me a lot of time. I used same animations across characters, only when they fit the personality. So I thought this death animation, because when you create animations for so many characters, when you made a death animation for your 40th time, and they all have to be different, you kind of lose your inspiration and you don't know how to kill a character this time. So yeah, it's also very practical to just sometimes reuse stuff, and the players don't see it. They're not like, oh, this one uses the same death animation as this one. As long as you show the character in the basic animations, like the idle pose has to be very unique for a character, and the walk cycle, I think those two are the most important. Attack animations are almost always different because they all have a different weapon, or they are ranged, or they have a used Gatling gun, or so I'm forced to make unique animations for that. But whenever possible, just reuse, share, mirror. Here I took the same concept, like going up first and falling down, and just tweaked it a little bit to fit the character. I also used a shared rig and shared animations. For these guys, these are the constructs, and you use them to break down walls and to bash in the quantum gate. And they all have the same personality. They're all bulky. They're very strong. So it wasn't really logical to create different animation for each animal version of it. So they share all share the same rig and the same animations. So that comes down to 220 animations, and that was doable for me. I had about 1.5 years at the time. Working in the evenings and weekends, it would be busy, but I could handle it. So I did it. I accepted the gig. My second problem was I was not on location. So yeah, how do you handle communication? How do you receive feedback? For me, it was my biggest worry that the communication would go wrong, or since you're not working face-to-face, or you can't just walk to a team member. I thought communication was very important, and it really helped me. We used Slack within the company, and that's a great way to keep up to date with everything that's going on inside of the company. And it's very important to not assume things. If you're not sure what someone else means, just ask. In this instance, we were talking about the architects, and they needed new weapons. And I thought he was talking about the architects, but it was about the minions of the architects. Those would get new weapons. So yeah, it's important to just ask if you're not sure. Plan ahead, which is very important, especially if you don't have a lot of time. This is a screenshot of an Excel sheet from a project I'm working on right now. It's for a different company, but it's the same principle. You really want to look in your agenda and see when are you very busy, when do you have lots of time. You can see in the end, I've got more characters done, 2 characters a week, than right now, because there's a summer holiday on school, so I have the week off, so I can do more work. So it's very important to think ahead and plan your time. Get as much information as you can. When I first started, one of the first animations I made for a female character, I just made a female walk, and I sent it over, and they were like, "Yeah, it's too sexy. We have more sexy characters, and this one is very sturdy and strong." And that's when I realized I really need an overview to see which characters are coming. What could I expect, so I could level the personalities, if that makes sense. So I got a lot of detail for each character, and this really, really helped me, because I exactly knew what his character was, how I could convey it in animations, what his little traits were, his special attacks. It's very important to get as much detail as you can about each character and get a reference. And this applies for every animation, not only freelance or remote. I use this reference for this character. And play. So I used some of the moves I saw in that video to animate this character, and yeah, it worked out okay. I first made the left animation. This is a walk cycle, and I sent it over, and they were, "Oh no, she's not organic. She's very mechanic, so it has to be very rigid and machine-like." So I made the second animation, and there's, oh, okay, and then the notes you get on your first animations you can use for the rest of the animations you make. So I knew every other animation I was making, it had to be rigid and mechanic. So check early with your art director. Be transparent. I found it very reassuring also for myself, because for me it's a lot of fun I really love animation. So for me it's doing my hobby and getting paid for it. And it still feels weird that people are actually paying me to do this, to make animations. So I think it's very important to be transparent about how you spend your hours. Also for them, I also include my pie chart every month, so that they can see how much time I spend in each department. So if they want to save time on something, they know where the biggest chunk of time goes into. Before sending it over, I always check my work in Unity, because I didn't have access to the project, the Unity project of the game. So I created a scene for myself to check the animations, if they are all working properly, if the skin was all right, and yeah, this proved really useful for myself. And as you can see, even though I copied a lot of animations, you still have quite a lot of variation in character and in movement. They're not all doing the same. So yeah, I have some personal notes on working remotely. It's a very nice thing that you can work when you're most productive. I like working at night, and I'm not a morning person. So yeah, most of the time I make late nights till 3 o'clock, and then have to work the next morning at school teaching. But that's fine for me. I would rather have that than stand up at 7 in the morning and start working then. The drawback is, though, sometimes you just need to have something done, and when you're not productive at that moment, yeah, that's a bummer. But you have that in all fields. Work is never finished. So in the weekends, when I really like drink beers with friends and go to parties and just do relaxing stuff in the weekend, as everyone does. But you're always thinking, the work's not finished. I still have to do so many animations. And you really got to learn to switch that off sometimes, to just, okay, now it's time to relax. I'm not going to think about it at all, because otherwise you'll go crazy. I would be burned out by now if I didn't do that. Visiting the company feels like a guild meeting. I don't know if any of you play World of Warcraft or have played it in the past, but when you're in a guild and you play with those people every day, doing raids together, talking to each other on team chat, but you have never met them in real life, and sometimes you just plan a guild meeting, and you meet everyone, and it's really fun to finally put faces to the names and to the characters. It kind of feels the same with working remotely, at least for me. It's a lot of fun. Lonely animator, because you're alone at home, in my case. And sometimes I would really like to have a team of animators to spar your ideas with, to get feedback on your work. So yeah, that's not a fun part of it. But luckily nowadays you have things like Discord, Twitch, all communities online. I found Twitter a very, very active animation community. So everyone is giving a lot of feedback on each other's work, supporting each other, sharing neat tricks. And so yeah, it's very important to stay up to date with your craft. But in the end, it's totally worth it, because this.
Let's take them down.
So, my takeaway, things that I found most important and I really want you to take home, is network is very important. Don't ever speak ill about someone. Always be nice to people in general. It's going to bite you in the butt if you don't do it, because the community is so small. If you do something wrong, people will know. Communication is key. Very important to just communicate with your employer, and schedule your time well. Improve your craft. So always try to improve on your skills. Don't overwork. Plan your relaxed moments and be smart. So reusing animations or in whatever way possible, just minimizing your work and still staying creative. So that was it. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Your nice talk. President, you must wait one moment. Some question from the audience.
Don't ask the why question.
Yeah, but why? No, what? If you don't mind me asking, what kind of deal did you have? Was it the per asset deal or per hour
deal?
Oh, it was per hour deal. Okay. So when you kind of cut down the animations and suggested improvements, it was kind of you are helping them as well as you did for yourself, right? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, short answer, sorry.
More questions?
will you ever move to Finland, or is this not an option for you?
No, because this project is now finished. Sorry. Probably there will be some work in the future, small animations, but not like a full-time job for me now. And I like it way too much, freelancing, because you have a lot of variation working for different game companies.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I wanted to ask, how did you come to animation? Did you made it maybe earlier some, I don't know, 2D stuff, or maybe did you learn some theories like this, or how was your journey?
Well, I first wanted to become a concept artist. So I drew a lot, and then I started school, and it was a very broad education. And then I discovered 3D, and I really liked 3D modeling. And then we were making a short animation, and nobody wanted to do the animation part. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. And then I found it a lot of fun. I really, really like animation, and that's where I started.
So you just kind of like, I started.
Yeah, I just stumbled upon it and liked it, yeah.
What can you recommend to a person when they are like at the beginning of 3D animation?
Animation principles?
No. What maybe kind of make your life easier?
Yeah, the animation principles.
Yeah, that's so. Yeah, that's.
Those
sure.
will make your life easier.
Yes.
When you learn to master them and implement them to your work and really understand it, why you are doing it, your animations will improve so much because they cover everything.
Yeah. That's okay. Thank you.
Did that answer your question, or?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Oh, there's one more question.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. We're actually working on a project that will need like very specific and anatomical referenced movement. Do you have any experience with like muscle rigs or
No, sorry.
No? Okay, thank you.
Last question? No more? But I have always one last question. Is there a project or a company in the market, maybe Johannes with a cool film project, where you say, okay, this project, I come to your country or to your company, like Blizzard or something else?
Yeah, Blizzard. I would love to work at Blizzard one day. Or Riot Games also has a really nice style of animation. I really like the stylized animation and not really the realistic side of animation, like motion capture. I know how to do it, but for me, it's not a lot of fun. So yeah, companies with that style can really persuade me. Yeah.
Okay, maybe Blizzard hear your talk today. What are the different the aspects to be a freelancer, or what is the hardest things for you? Is it socializing, what you are missing, or to work at home, or what is for you on your personal side?
I guess the procrastination side of it. Yeah. That you have to do work and then you save it for the last moment, and then you have to do a lot of work in less time.
Yeah.
And also feeling guilty when you're off the job. So the combination of those two things, procrastinating and then feeling guilty when you're actually relaxing, it's not a good combination.
No, it's not a good combination. Thank you very much for your very interesting talk and your present from you.
Thank you.
And now he's on fire.
All right, hello everyone. I'm Chris Wilson. I'm lead animator for a company called No Code. It's a small independent studio based out of Glasgow, Scotland. So I'll give you a quick introduction to my career and background. I have 15 years of cinematic and AAA games development experience, where I started out in pre-rendered cinematics, where so we were an outsourced studio in Australia that were developing cinematics and game trailers for companies such as THQ, Take-Two, Eidos, and some of the bigger publishers. During my time, I mainly specialise in motion capture animation. I've worked in conjunction with Weta Digital, Giant Studios and Imaginarium Studios with the following companies. So I started out working for a company called Plastic Wax in Australia. I then moved to the UK. I worked for Ninja Theory, where I was the first person on the cinematics team for Heavenly Sword, where we worked in conjunction with Weta Digital for that. It was a really eye-opening experience. I'd never had any experience working with the film industry before, and I felt that their ethos and their working structure seemed to fit really well with within the games industry and what we were trying to achieve, which is a more of a cinematic experience with games. I'd set up the pipeline for the cinematic work on Heavenly Sword. That was being done in a custom engine that was owned by Sony, and then once we'd finished on Heavenly Sword, we then started on Enslaved, where we transitioned into Unreal 3. Once again, it was sort of starting from scratch and establishing a new cinematic pipeline for them to use in Unreal 3. From there, I moved to Copenhagen. I was working for IO Interactive and working on Hitman games. Once again, they didn't have a cinematic pipeline in place, so I was brought in with my previous experience at Ninja Theory to establish a workflow and a pipeline for dealing with the cinematic production there. We worked in conjunction with Giant Studios, which is a mocap supplier in the US. I then moved on to Rocksteady in London, where I was part of the Batman Arkham Knight team, and also worked on the Batman VR there with them. So they had a pretty well established pipeline, but there was a lot that I learned there as well in their production. They have really ingrained production values. So I took a lot of experience from there, and then I went to work for it was a startup studio called Imaginati, which was owned by Andy Serkis of Gollum fame. So we were making Planet of the Apes. It was not so much a game; it was more of an interactive movie, interactive movie where the characters would converse with each other, and you basically decide whether you agree or you disagree, and it was a branching story. That was a very, very heavy on cinematic production, and also working very, very similar to how the film industry works. Pre-production. Now, if we're lucky enough to be part of the pre-production process, it's the number one thing is to plan and plan and plan. So, as I've said, the film industry had a huge influence on my career, that particularly working with previs, which is very, very basic rudimentary animations. And then with doing those, you're limiting the amount of animation work that you're actually doing. And it helps people see what direction the project is going in without having to do too much work and work that possibly will get thrown away. So yeah, we all love a good meeting. Yeah, lots of stuff on whiteboards and pointing, discussing ideas and concerns, nodding in agreement, and then leaving the meeting and generally forgetting most things that have been discussed. But on a serious note. The pre-production phase is quite good to get a good overview of the game design and story/script. It's still very, very early days, and the product is still trying to find its feet in a way. But it's just good to get a rough idea of what the expectations are from an animation department. A well-planned project should have some form of design documentation. So you can see here, this is a stripped out design document from my current company. So you can see here that we break the project down into chapters and scenes. Each scene is represented by the vertical columns there. They'll generally have, there'll be maybe a link to the script or a particular description about what's happening in that section of the game. And then we also track all the components that are going into each scene. So we've got, whether there's tutorials, there's character animation, there's movement logic in place, there's VFX and things like that. The colours with the green and the orange, they indicate a stage, a particular stage that component is in during production, and this is constantly updated throughout the production. So from that, you can gather quite a good. Get a good understanding of the scope of the project. Sorry about this. So once again, it's a good idea for animators to have their input into the project and see what will work, and maybe discuss what the designers are looking for to get the most out of the project. You can also use this time to gather any resources that are required. So, for example, you may not be in a position during pre-production where your character team or rigging department has characters set up. So what I've often done in the past is I just go online, I get some free resources, I'll get a free character rig or something like that, and just use that as a placeholder to start just roughly blocking out some animations, just so that people can see things in movement and get an idea of how things are going to turn out. So once you get into production, just keep it. I found that keeping things very, very simple to begin with. I think it's quite easy for artistic people that they want to get in there and they want to finish it off and do really nice quality work from the get-go. But another take from the film industry is they do a lot of pre-visualization, and if you see pre-visualization from any sort of big Hollywood blockbuster film, the what you see in a pre-visualization is almost identical to what you're seeing in the final production. So it just simplifies things. It makes it easier to throw ideas around, throw ideas away, try things out, and yeah, just keep it simple. So I've just got an example here. It's potato quality previs for the Matrix. So it's probably a very familiar scene, but I think you get the idea. So yeah, so that's the planning side of things is very, very important, and it helps with the story, it helps with the game design, it helps everything sort of come together. I'm very hesitant to use things such as storyboards and things like that, because I feel that you don't get a feel for the timing or the pacing or the mood, depending, because at least with a previs you can still, you can do your camera work and things like that and get a good sense for the style that you're going for as well. So yeah, ideas do change a lot. So you want to maintain flexibility. So an example of this is the current project that I'm working on. When we were first concepting the game, we had very, very different ideas about the AI-driven character in the game and how that character would react with the environment and be part of that environment. So originally it was going to be very procedural, and the character would be able to go off and do tasks and things like that. Basically, the character could be doing anything at any time. But through in very, very short amount of time, the story changed, the design changed, and the requirements for what that character needed to do changed quite a lot, and it became a lot more scripted, I guess. And I was thankful that I didn't rush ahead and start just generating animation after animation of different specific tasks that this character should be doing. Because at the end of the day, probably 90% of it would have just been thrown out. So basically try and limit the amount of work that's thrown away, because no one likes to waste their time on something they're very proud of and only to have it not be used in the final product. So I tend to looking at more like locomotion and gameplay or mechanics animations, I also keep that very, very, very simple, and generally just do pose to pose, just so that basically just to get the core mechanics of the game working. And through my experience with AAA studios, that you can work on something for maybe a couple of weeks. You're working on a sequence, an animation sequence or something, and then that work goes off. It gets reviewed, but it can be weeks, it can be months before you actually get any feedback on that. So in AAA production, we really tried to keep everything very, very minimal and create content in particular stages. So we would start with a previs and then move to maybe motion capture and so on and so forth. And it gives the directors, it gives everyone a good chance to really digest and see if things are heading in the right direction. So yeah, they're creating assets and stages and keeping track of this. I've got so this is a sort of a description of the staging for animations, whether they're character movements or they're cutscenes or just sequence animations. So stage one, it's basically a previs, just getting something in there for people to look at. Stage two could be just filling in a little bit more detail in the animation. Because I mainly work with motion capture, generally that's you'll capture that data. You won't do any cleanup on it. You'll just implement it into game, just so that there's something a little bit more detailed. I think there's a common thing that people can't read between the lines when they see a previs animation and they actually think that's the final quality. So just adding in that little extra bit of detail, it always helps everyone see what's going on. And then sort of stage three is just locking everything down. All timings and everything should be set to a, if you maybe say for cinematics, your edits should be complete and done. And then, say, for example, using mocap, that's where you start to really lock down hands and feet and contact points and things like that. And then, and then you got your polish phase, which is make everything look shiny. So this is kind of like an example of how I track character animations. So it's just getting as much detail in there as possible. You've obviously got the character's name. Maybe if you have different states for the character, whether they've got different costumes and so on and so forth. That some costumes might require different animations. So, in the current project I'm on, the character has two states. One of the costumes is sort of casual wear and very slim, and then the other costume is quite big and bulky. So obviously we have to have different animation sets for those two character states. Then I just break everything down into what kind of animation it is, whether it's an idle, there's a job system, there's you've got turns and locomotion and so on and so forth. And then anything else that's required for that animation. So I make notes of whether it's a looped animation, if there's variations. In this case, for variations, I have I've set up a system where it's a procedural, it's like procedural idles. So basically, you can just layer up a countless number of idles, and then each animation gets weighted in over time. So essentially, you're not ever seeing the same animation. So that's like with the variations and additives. The development stage is what I went through previously before. So this keeps everything very very visible to the team as well. They can tell what animations are done, what stage they're at, and I keep track of, even if there's animations that, so the ones that are grayed out, for example, they're animations that would have been created maybe for the original AI system, but then obviously we changed the system, so those animations get pulled out. But I still keep track and have a record of those animations, of those assets that I've created. And then also, if animations require anything like facial animation, just keeping a track of that and making sure that it's in there and what stage the facial animation's at. So once again, it's a similar thing for animation sequences. So this may be cutscenes or just small interaction moments, environment interactions, and so on and so forth. So once again, it's keeping track of everything that's required within each individual scene. So whether the animation will contain a loop, so that sometimes you'll have a sequence that will play out. There'll be some dialogue, and then maybe the character's waiting for an input or a response from the player. So during that time where the player has an input, you'll run a loop on the character for that time. So yeah, just keeping track of things like that, keeping track of the characters that are in the scenes, props that are used in the scenes. Once again, the staging of the scenes, and then also just like the work that's actually been done. So has it been, in these cases it's been motion captured. So has it been captured? Has it been implemented? There's facial animation been generated for it, which is face effects. Whether even if a lot of the facial animation is automatically generated through a program called Face Effects, which takes audio files and text annotations and generates facial animation out of that. But some scenes, say for cut scenes or cinematic sequences, then we'll do an extra pass on that and we'll actually polish up the animation on that. So whether it's required for that scene or not. And then everything else, VFX that are required for the scene, the audio that's required for the scene, But yeah, it's just really keeping track of everything and covering your ass to so you know exactly where you are. Yeah, so generally the start of production, it's I feel like you're almost acting as a service for other departments. So if design needs a particular animation to see how a particular part of gameplay is going to work, then you supply them with what they need for that to work. It's also beneficial for other departments, say tools programmers and things like that as well, that while working with designers, working with programmers as well, that you get an idea for what tools you possibly may need, or scripts and so on and so forth. So it's good to just work as a service to other departments during sort of early production stages. So you help yourself by helping others. The more ideas that the game designers generally have, the easier it makes your life. So you're not redoing work, or things aren't getting changed too often and thrown away. I've had experiences in the past. I was working on Hitman Absolution. That was a 7-year project, and we'd been working on it for about 4 or 5 years, and suddenly someone went, the story doesn't work, and they threw everything out. So it was 4 or 5 years of work that got scrapped, and that was just down to poor planning and communication. Don't be too precious about your work. It's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to throw work away essentially. But if you're smart and you plan well and you don't rush head on into things, then you're not. I think you can kind of live with the choices a bit more. It can be very soul destroying to have work that you've put a lot of pride into just be completely thrown out. Documentation is very, very vital. We all love a good Excel spreadsheet, right? So, but I can't vouch for it enough that it's easy for it's very easy, very visible for you, for your team, for other departments to actually see where you are and what stages you're at within the project, and if you're actually in line with everyone else. Post-production. So by the time you hit post-production, you should generally be in quite a good place where you have well planned game design. story should be more or less locked down now, and I think you have an idea of what the requirements are for the product, and I think it definitely gives you a chance to then really put your work into where it's required and get a good sense of polishing things up and making things look as good as possible. But yeah, I think that's kind of it. Any questions?
You have a very cool track record.
Yeah.
There are a lot of games that I have played.
Yeah.
What was your favorite game or company what you work for?
I don't know. It's a tough question there. I mean, they all had their own little things that stood out. I think, I was like Ninja Theory was my first proper experience with, say working with Weta Digital and was working with Andy Serkis and actually seeing that whole production and how they put everything together. It was really quite eye-opening, and I learned a lot there. And but then, for example, then going to IO Interactive and being given the opportunity to actually start their cinematic production from the ground up for that project. Yeah. So it's I think it varies from company to company. Yeah, all have their challenges, and that's sort of what I'm there for is a challenge. So.
Yeah. I think it must be cool to work for an IP like Hitman or when you're a Marvel fan, Batman.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was, when I was younger, I was a massive fan of Hitman, of the Hitman games, and they're probably, that's some of the games that made me really want to get into games development, and then to have that opportunity to actually be part of that team was it's really great. Yeah.
Some questions from the audience.
I would like to know the story. How did you come in touch with filmmakers?
At Ninja Theory, they had a plan to do, Heavenly Sword, it was quite a stylized game. It was almost a cartoony style game, and then they decided to try and go down this sort of hyper-real, photorealistic route, and the game director, his brother, was Andy Serkis's accountant, and Andy Serkis had showed an interest in games, and his accountant said, well, my brother's a game director for a company, and then that just it went from there, and they just got us in touch with Weta, and it just sort of rolled from there, and I think it's becoming a lot. The games production it's got a lot more of a cinematic feel, and they're taking a lot from the film industry now and trying to get the story and the emotion into gameplay. Like, I mean, you see, for example, with the Last of Us, and I mean, particularly like Naughty Dog, they do amazing stuff, right? There's this real crossover now between film experience and the games experience, and I think those two industries are really coming closer together. So I think it's a natural evolution that the lines are very blurred between the two now, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
More questions from Emmer? You also work for indie companies.
Yes, so first indie company I worked for was Imaginati Studios. So it was started by Andy Serkis, who also owns Imaginarium Studios, which is a mocap studio in London. They do a lot of mocap for, like, they did Planet of the Apes films. They're doing Star Wars stuff like that. But they also supply a lot of mocap for games as well. So they decided to start their own games division. So it was a small team. It was 20 people.
Okay.
To work on the Planet of the Apes game, which was to tie in with the last film that was made. And I guess I've been working AAA for so long, and I think I've sort of sold my soul to the devil, and I got a little bit tired of it, So at the end of the day, you work for these larger companies, and you can sometimes you're just another cog in the machine, and I like to have my say, and put my ideas out there, and I think it's a very hard thing to do in these larger companies. So I decided to take the experiences that I had with AAA and try and bring them into independent studios. So I work for the company I work for now, No Code. There was originally 3 people that when they did their first game, and now they've expanded to 9 people. So, okay. But it's a good size, because it's everyone's just sitting in the same room. The communication's excellent, and it's just bouncing ideas around and so on and so forth. And I think they really value everyone's input. Okay. Yeah. So it's definitely I don't knock AAA development. I think it's a good learning experience for anyone that's thinking of getting into games development. And it's an eye opener, and you do learn a lot. But you can also take a lot away from it, and use those practices for indie development as well.
Before we heard from Karen about the pros and cons to be a freelancer, is it an option in your part of the process of the production pipeline?
It could be. It's not something I've really put any thought into before. I think for me personally, I do need that discipline of actually going in and being around other people and working with other people. I think if I was sitting at home, I would get nothing done. So, it's just one of those things. I just, never really thought about it. But I enjoy being around people, and it's the synergy of getting ideas and exchanging ideas and all of that, and sort of very rapid prototyping. I really like that stuff. So, yeah.
Last 2 questions. Before this talk, I never know how much work is. As an artist, you must be a creative head and not an Excel spread head. How much work is to fill out these continually these spreads?
It's not too much overhead, because it's something that's built up over the entire production process. Okay. And then once you've got templates set up, then it's you're carrying them over from project to project. So a lot of these examples, I've used them at other studios before, and I just take a copy of that and apply it to wherever I go. So especially say through pre-production, you start to get an idea of assets and it's more about just making notes and filling in the details of what could or could possibly happen further down the line, and then whether that list grows or it shrinks, at least you've got something in place. And I'd say, at No Code, I am the only animator there as well. So, it's not 100% necessary for me to keep track of this stuff, but I still find it very useful, and it's still a good way of communicating to the rest of the team. Rather than having to ask so many questions, they've got that information right there in front of them. It's very clear and concise, so they can. yeah, I can see.
Last question, your actual work, is it a AAA game with a well-known IP or a new IP?
My current project, it's indie. It's an indie game that is trying to push a AAA quality. So it's a very small team, but they're a very experienced team with a lot of AAA experience. It's a new IP. Yeah. But yeah, I think we'll be announcing in the next couple of months or something like that. So, yeah.
Sounds very interesting. AAA indie games are coming now, more and more.
Yeah, we're trying, yeah.
Yeah, it's a trend in the industry, and we see more these AAA indie titles.
Yeah, and I think because things are a lot more accessible these days, and with the processing power and just software availability and stuff like that. I think it's and especially like with the engines, with the game engines as well, such as Unity and Unreal, that it's very, very easy for people to get in there and create really high quality content quite easily, and there's a lot of resources online. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's going to be a big jump in the independent industry, I think. Yeah.
I'm a big fan from Patrice Desailly, and he has now also a AAA indie studio, and we see new publishers in this area of the gaming industry. Thank you for your very interesting talk.
Yeah, no problem.
A small present from us.
Sure, thank you.
And I think we see us later.
Yeah, sure.
It's a party.
Great, thank you.
I hope you all enjoyed our small day from the experience conference track here, and I hope I see you later on the digital artist meet and greet at the Medienbunker in the Feldstraße. And don't forget, we need your buttons, otherwise we can't identify you as a participant from the conference, and otherwise you must pay €5. Okay, have a nice evening. See you.